All right, we should be ready to go. All I have to do is find the controls. This is another one of those look at the screen nights all night tonight. This is all you're going to see of me, which may not be a bad thing. We're going to be looking at a lot of horoscopes again, of presidents and transits, and some of it will be frustrating and some of it will be wild speculation. I hope that it is enjoyable, educational, useful, helpful, whatever. So let's just get started. All right. Reminding you again what we're doing. We are looking at the horoscopes of all the presidents that I have lived under. And we're looking at the time of their inauguration. We're trying to see whether there are significant transits there that would indicate that this is a high point of their life. So far, we have been very unsuccessful. And we'll discuss that more toward the end of the talk, but maybe this is not a thing to do with transits. That's what you find sometimes if you try to do research. You have ideas or you try things, and some of them work and some of them don't. In the meantime, we will learn some astrology and something about human nature. So that's what we're trying to do. I think we'll have one more talk on transits, and then in July we will begin with progressions, which will be something very different. All right, this is the horoscope of George H.W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush. And it's a horoscope that's made for prominence. If the inner circle is the natal horoscope, and the outer circle is the transits at the time of the inauguration. And we see two planets in the 10th house in the natal horoscope, and that's somebody that's probably going to have a high place in the world, even if it's in a local society. Maybe at the local country club, if you have a 10th house, you might be a prominent person there. That's interesting. Shows how different people do things differently. This is the same rising sign that Donald Trump had, but it's certainly a much different kind of individual. If we look at it, Mercury in this horoscope is, let's see, where are my notes here? Mercury is square to Mars. Let's see, all right, there's Mars, there's Mercury, there's a square between the two of them. Where Donald Trump had Mercury square to Neptune, or has Mercury square to Neptune, and he was a liar and very much confused. What happens is with George Bush is he's sometimes outspoken even though he doesn't want to be. Or he has things said about him that he doesn't want to have said. For the most famous example with George H.W. Bush, he said openly, "I hate broccoli." Definitely not a vegetarian. The sun is in the 10th house. Very well placed. It is in a trine to the two planets in the 3rd house and also trine to Mars, so there is a grand trine in air signs. The sun also sextiles Neptune, which shows that he has a lot of secret influence. Neptune in the 12th is enough of that alone. And he was the head of the CIA. In fact, he was the first president and perhaps the only president that we've had that was head of the secret police, which raised a lot of eyebrows at the time. The grand trine with the sun and moon and Saturn and Mars indicates that he's a good executive. He's good at management, he's good at organization and politics. The strongest aspect is the Mars trine Saturn, which is extremely strong. It's almost exact, and that is mechanics. And for him, it is, he knows how to get things done. He knows when things should be done and what kind of a procedure should be used. Now, the strength of Mars versus the weakness of Venus shows that he has more of a hawkish nature than he has a dove nature. His knowledge of politics and his hawkish nature didn't keep him from getting into the first Iraq war. It was the trine saved him. He did not destroy the balance of power in the Mideast. If he had completely obliterated Iraq, which could easily have been done, the problem that would have ensued from that was that then Iran would have become strong as it is. He did have some problems with communication. Looking at the third house, he made this big deal about the white paper that he was sending to Saddam Hussein before the war began. And he made a big deal about that. And then Tariq Aziz, who was the chief man for Hussein, just pushed it aside as if it were a stale salad or something like that. He just got one-upped on the whole situation. Now, he has impulsiveness. The sun is square to Uranus, and his impulsiveness got him into war. And Mars square Mercury got him into war. So he's, he has knowledge and the ability to talk and to organize, but he couldn't control his impulsiveness. Now, if we look at the outer ring, we look first at the outermost planets, which are Pluto over here in 14 degrees of Scorpio, Neptune, which is in 10 degrees of Capricorn. It forms an opposition to Pluto, but not really strong. It shows some kind of deceptiveness. His deceptiveness was in foreign policy. He had secret missions that were trying to overcome the Sandinistas and in Nicaragua, and the word got out about that. But is his whole administration likely to be secretive because of this? Likely. The Uranus forms nothing. So when we come to the other outer planets, Jupiter and Saturn, we see that Jupiter is roughly coming toward Mercury, and that's likely to be speaking too much or trying to be eloquent or something of that nature. Now, what happened is he was not a popular president. He was, even with Leo rising, he was not the kind of person that people take to. And he had sort of a stiff and a snobbish way about him. And what happened is that he got into office under coattails of Ronald Reagan. And when Ronald Reagan's prosperity ran out, there weren't any more tax cuts that could be made. People were unhappy. And it's surprising how many people vote according to their pocketbook, and that's what he had to deal with. All right, I guess that's enough for now. We're going backwards in time, and the all right. This is the first inauguration of Ronald Reagan. America, or United States of America, seems to have a love of Aquarian presidents. They treat them well, they honor them. Lincoln was an Aquarius, Roosevelt was an Aquarius, and Ronald Reagan was an Aquarius. Now he has Sagittarius rising, and Sagittarius it's a very popular thing. Basically, Neptune conjoined the ascendant. He could project an image that he wanted to project, and he did it. Jupiter, which is the ruler of the ascendant, is in a, let's see where it is here. Jupiter is in a square with the sun and the moon. So it's a T-square in the fixed signs. And this shows him to be, he was quite stubborn, but he was a likable, stubborn person, and that went a long way. Now, he claimed to be conservative, but maybe yes, maybe no. It certainly wasn't like conservative as modern the neocons are. They're quite, polarizing and extreme. Conservatives hate taxes, so he loved tax cuts, and he enacted them as much as he could. So in that way, he was a conservative. He promised that there would be smaller government, but government actually grew, and so did the national debt. So in that, he wasn't so conservative. Now, popularity in those days, not so much now. In fact, it's almost the opposite now. The Republicans or the conservatives or the right got their popularity from being anti-communist. And he was very strongly anti-communist. And what he did is he got Cap Weinberg in as a defense secretary, and they just spent oodles and oodles and oodles on armament, and what happened is that the USSR couldn't keep up, and they yelled "Uncle." This kind of excess, especially this kind of excess in spending. The sun is on the cusp of the second house, which is spending, and the moon, I'll pass on that. So, as an artist, he was successful, because if we look at Venus in this chart, Venus has a very strong sextile to Mars, and let's see, Venus is sextile to Saturn, which is trine to Mars. And if Venus is stronger than Mars, more likely he's likely to be successful as an artist than as a politician or scientist or person with hands-on or things like that. He was called a great communicator, which might have been, with the Neptune conjoined ascendant, the great dissembler, or the the great feigner. Now, Mercury conjoins Uranus, so, and they're strongly opposite to, Mercury is strongly opposite to Neptune. So he was easily confused. and he got a lot of misnotions. I remember the time that it was in the news that he thought that trees were air pollutants, air polluters. That's, he was misinformed. Now, Neptune conjoins the ascendant in the first inauguration. And that indicates he was basically, how would you say it? He wasn't really a president. He was a figurehead. Other people ran the country, and he was the figurehead that people loved, and he could get on television and make speeches that, people liked what he said, whether they agreed with it or not politically. Pluto in the natal chart is opposite the ascendant. That's where his strong conservative nature comes in. It's on the axis of the first and seventh house of the United States horoscope, which I would like to go into, but we're not going to be able to go into it at this time, and better left it things unsaid than getting into something that we're not prepared for. All right, the second inauguration. This is the second inauguration. Has Neptune on the ascendant, as it, Neptune moves very slowly. And Neptune was on top of Mars. And he could demonstrate a lot of bluster. But does this mean that this was a high point in his life? I don't think so. You look for something much more, something much more ego-building to say, like, I've accomplished it, I've made it. The Pluto transiting squares the natal Uranus. Let's get where we are here. Here's Pluto, and it's, what is that? I got something wrong with my notes here. Jupiter trines Uranus. All right. Jupiter is on top of Uranus. And that is an indication of, that's basically, I don't know how to say it, it's a bullshitter's aspect. And you might say that the second term that he had was basically, he was bluffing everything. He did he won his bluff, and it was, Neptune conjoined Mars is a deception about martial strength, and Jupiter conjoined Uranus indicates a basic bluff about things. And what happened is, this is when they almost banned all nuclear weapons. Who was the Russian leader at that time? I forget his name. But this shows very clearly the kind of thing that he was capable of, and that was ripe at this time. The moon, we're not looking at interplanet transits, but the moon was right on there, 1 degree away, or less than a degree away, saying this was something that was ripe. It was a good time to put forth a good show of strength and be successful by it. Now, during the span of his 2 terms, Uranus, all right, let's get to Uranus here. All right, yeah, Uranus went through all of his, during his administration, went over the whole first house, which shows everything was going to be, it was going to be a good show. The sudden changes of things. All right, he was shot, and we're going to come to that in a little bit because it's something quite fascinating. And but he was shot, and of all things, even though he was shot, he did not want legislation to ban weapons of any kind. He was the darling of the NRA. All right, this is the horoscope of Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter is probably a very good, likable human being, but was a relatively ineffectual president. His popularity and likability with Saturn in the first house are quite surprising. Normally, people with Saturn in the first house aren't always the most likable people. There's some people have almost an immediate aversion for them. But when it is there very well. Like Abraham Lincoln also had Saturn in the first house, or very near the ascendant. So I don't know the why of that. I've never done a study on it. I know that it's something that happens, but I've never looked into the psychology. It was because of something inward that he was so popular. This is a lovable, faithful, caring man. The sun forms only one aspect. It's an applying aspect, and it's a sextile to Jupiter. So you can see that positivity is something that builds in his life. But it's hard to tell why he was so likable. The T-square, there's a T-square between, let's see, Pluto, I have not very good notes here. Okay, we have Mars is opposite to Venus. That's not exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something relating, oh, here we go, Sun is square to Pluto. And that shows difficulty with, Pluto indicates people of power in high places. And the square of the Sun to Pluto indicates that he did not have favor with people of power. He did a lot of things that on principle, Pluto's in the 9th house, which is a house of principles. He did a lot of things on principle, but they were unpopular. Like, for example, the political institutions didn't feel very good about him at all. He was bucking the oil industry because he wanted to have solar power. And in a lot of things of that nature, he fell down, and people didn't, it didn't curry a lot of favor with them. He was, now that we've said now that the Sun forms a weak sextile to Jupiter and a weak square to Pluto, and that means he's not a strong personality. Somebody can be likable without being a strong character. And that was the case with him. But this is something that shows how valuable something can be, even if it's something normally taken negatively. He was a master negotiator, had to be a master negotiator to negotiate a peace with Israel, with her neighbors, Egypt and Jordan. That was a remarkable feat. Now, if the negotiator is too strong of a personality, it's hard for that person to be a negotiator. They're not a neutral person. And him not having a threatening or intimidating character and not trying to flex the muscle of the United States, it made him an excellent negotiator. So even though he was unpopular, he was even among the people, he developed in popularity because, again, as a matter of principles, he wouldn't go to the Olympic Games in Russia. He boycotted them, and he lost a lot of favor in that. There are not many things in the transitory in the inauguration chart. Uranus conjoins the moon, which shows that his candidacy is sort of a quirk of destiny. The moon is an excellent place. It's in a grand trine with Uranus and Pluto, and the moon in the natal chart is in a grand trine, and when Uranus triggers that off, it's a very excellent thing. It shows his religion and his willingness. He has a feel for his convictions. Neptune, being conjoined to Jupiter, shows that he had the same thing with inflation that Joe Biden did. But there's something very interesting in this. Now let's, in order to get to that, let's just look at the outer chart. In the outer chart, looking at the heavy planets, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, all of them are on the east, and Jupiter was in the west. And this produced a condition that the news called stagflation. And so he had, from the Neptune-Jupiter, the idea of prosperity, but there was actually inflation, which is the same thing that Joe Biden suffered for. So how to rate his presidency? Very difficult. Some things he was excellent at, and some not so excellent. This is the chart of Gerald Ford. He was only president for less than 900 days. And he has a distinction of the only person to be president or to become president without having been elected as president or as vice president. What happened is he was vice president to Richard Nixon, but he wasn't elected to that position. He was Speaker of the House, and Richard Nixon had a vice president named Spiro Agnew who came victim of his own corruption, and he had to resign while he was in office. And then according to the Constitution, Gerald Ford was the next in line to the presidency, so he was made the vice president. And Nixon then resigned, and then he became president. He was not popular as a president. He was sort of like a bumbling kind of guy. Obviously, he wasn't popular because the first thing he did when he was president was to pardon Nixon. And there was uproar because Nixon resigned because he was going to be forced out of office, which would have been ignominy for him. And so Gerald Ford got off to a bad start. It's not the kind of personality that people like. They like somebody like Ronald Reagan, who is Sagittarius rising, outgoing and smiling and cheery. In Aquarius, it was blustery enough, but if we look at the sun and rising of Gerald Ford, the sun is in Cancer, and Taurus is rising in those. Compared to Jupiter, to Sagittarius and Aquarius, these are sort of blah signs to impress the public with. Mars is rising in his horoscope, which indicates he had some ability as an athlete, and he was a successful athlete in college. And the Mars is sextile to the Sun, and it is trine to Jupiter. And interestingly, Jupiter is not opposite the Sun. So those things happen once in a while like that. Mercury is square to Mars, and he was another one that was outspoken, only it wasn't like H.W. Bush saying, I hate broccoli. He just sort of made gaffes in a way almost similar to Biden. The two darkest planets are in the second house, and he became unpopular because there was a recession came in with his presidency. There's nothing that really stands out in his inauguration. There are no transits of any kind that are really significant. So you can see that this is neither positive nor negative administration. All right. This is for the first term of Richard Nixon. How to talk about him. His detractors called him Tricky Dick. He has Virgo rising. And that's a mental sign. It's a nervous, worrisome sign. And the ruler is Mercury. And Mercury is in a conjunction with Mars in the last degree of Sagittarius and Jupiter in the second degree of Capricorn, while Mercury is in the first degree of Capricorn. And Capricorn itself is a worrywart kind of sign. And it's also a sly sign. So it's not a mistake. Foxes, for example, are ruled by Capricorn. And so it's not a mistake for him to have been seen as a wily kind of person. The conjunction is opposite to Pluto. And that is, how to say it? Pluto up there again in the 10th house is another example of people in high places. People that he was constantly having to fight the drive for power. And the opposition, in some ways, actually made his power possible. I don't know how to say it, but with that, there is a lot of oscillation. When there are oppositions, and this is a 3-planet opposition to Pluto, which is in a vacillatory sign itself, so there's a lot of vacillation. Now, there is a sextile of these planets with Venus, and Venus is a planet that has to do with women. And Nixon always did very well with the woman's vote. So even though he was a sly, tricky guy, he was stiff and cold. Nonetheless, women still liked him. The sun is opposite to Neptune, which shows again all kinds of subterfuge and illusion and things like that. It also shows psychological instability. It was very clear when he was talking to portraits of presidents when he was undergoing the impeachment. He was actually talking to pictures and things like that. He was in an unstable position. Now, we've talked about the personal qualities of this man, but he was not a bad president. In fact, he was a pretty good president. His foreign policy was excellent. As quietly as he could, he got us out of Vietnam. He opened up China, and he had détente with the USSR. Now, those are some pretty good things to have accomplished. That's, and we have to remember, in these days, the right wasn't as far right as it is now, and the left wasn't as woke as it is now. There were blendings and overlap quite a bit. In general, the Republicans did better with the Cold War than the Republicans. The Republicans did better than the Democrats. And the reason for that was because they were known as communist haters. And they could do things like make détente with the USSR, where if the Democrats tried to do the same thing, they would be called selling out to communism. So he did pretty well. Now, he even did pretty well with all of his opposition. He does have the positive planets in the sixth house, which is the lower house, and he had a Democratic Congress that he had to deal with, but he still got things through. In fact, this is one of those Republicans that was not so conservative at all. He even got price controls enacted. Now, there are a few transits, outer planet transits. Jupiter is transiting the dragon's tail, but I don't know what that means. I'd have to do a major study to understand what that means. The transiting Saturn, transiting Saturn is square to the natal sun. And that did not bode well for him. It meant ultimately that he would be overcome. When he was impeached, it was because of the personal dishonesty. It wasn't because of his policies. Now, there's a very strong where is it here? I'm gonna have to pass on that for now. My notes are not clear. As mentioned earlier, there are different kinds of events that relate to a natal chart. And we're not finding what we thought we were going to find by looking at outer planet transits in inaugurations. And that's what astrological research is like. It's like, very much like Thomas Edison says, that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% work. You have to try a lot of things and work at a lot of things before you come up with things. So we'll find other things we found other things earlier about transits, and we'll find more later on. And we'll have to do some other studies to carry this further. All right. Now, this is the second inauguration. Oh. And here we find nothing much going with Pluto. nothing much going with Uranus. It's square to the natal Neptune, and it's roughly square the Sun, but it's too far that it's not something you consider. And nothing going on with Neptune. Jupiter, could say it's opposite to Neptune, but there's nothing that we see in the second inauguration that indicates that he's going to be ousted from office. The only thing that inclines one to think that way is that Saturn is up at the midheaven, and the midheaven is either fame or ignominy. And that's something that does take place with him. He was, had an ignominious end, and he never really recovered from it. He always insisted that that everything that he did was all right, even when it wasn't. Okay. Let's move on to the next president earlier. Oops. It's the horoscope of Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson had 2 terms as president, and the first one was at the assassination of Kennedy, which we're going to go into quite a bit in a little bit. This is what happened right after the assassination of Kennedy. But let's look at Lyndon Johnson and see what kind of a man he was. He was a very successful man, but he was also highly unpopular. His success came in pushing through Congress the Great Society, which was all kinds of social welfare programs and research and things of that time. It was probably the biggest thing for public programs since Franklin Roosevelt. Another one of his successes, he pushed through civil rights legislation and was successful with that. Now, these are very liberal things, and he did this in the face of a not friendly Congress. But the mood of the nation, in the same way that we said earlier that the mood of the nation after Reagan was positive, and that brought in George H.W. Bush. He rode in on the coattails of a very positive financial time. And the mood of the nation was very liberal at the time that Johnson was inaugurated, because everybody loved Kennedy, and they thought it was such a tragedy for Kennedy to have been assassinated. Now, part of his unpopularity was because of the Vietnam War. His entire tenure of both administrations had to deal with the Vietnamese War. And that was a terrible thing. The prevailing attitude in the United States was there was a paranoia that communism was going to try to surround the United States and eventually snuff it out. And there was fear of China, the yellow hordes of masses, were going to overcome. And there was fear of Russia. And when Vietnam War began, there was what was called the domino theory, that if Vietnam goes, Laos will go, and Thailand will go, and all of Southeast Asia will become communist, and then it'll be one step closer to dominating the world. Now, this is the horoscope of a Texan. Leo is rising, and Jupiter is conjoined almost exactly to the ascendant. And that does everything in a big way. And the outer image that Lyndon Johnson put forth was the image of a big Texan. And he really thought that way. He had Jupiter was sextile to Pluto, and again, Pluto is powerful people in high places, and he had the support of the CIA and all sorts of things of that nature. Now, he has 4 planets in Virgo: Mars, Sun, conjoined, and a little further on, the Moon is in Virgo, and a little further yet, Mercury is in Virgo. So he was very much a planner or a schemer and very shrewd. He knew how to use his image to get power over anybody he ever dealt with. And he got power over the Kennedys. There was a thing that in the Democratic Party that there was the Southwest, like Texans, were always at war with the New England Democrats. And the whole way of things was disliked. And Lyndon Johnson hated both of the Kennedy brothers, especially Bobby, and did everything he could to humiliate them. We'll have more to say about this also. The Venus in this horoscope is conjoined Neptune and opposite Uranus. The way that worked out with him, the Venus-Neptune is hidden love, and he kept a mistress for decades, and his wife looked the other way in it. Now, this is the first inauguration, which took place right after the assassination, and here we find something that makes sense. It isn't a culmination, but it is like a positive death is what propelled him into office. A positive death is what gave him what he wanted. This is likely, since Saturn is in the 8th house, it was a destined event in his life. Now, the Uranus transit is conjoined to the Moon, which shows like this is an inauguration as a result of a sudden change. That his life changed totally unexpectedly. At least some people think that way. Now, during his presidency, Uranus went through Virgo, and that was the Vietnam War, and that was his plague. At that time, I was keeping an astrological journal, and in this period, we see Mars up here in Virgo, and Mars, at the time of his presidency, Mars, it goes around the entire zodiac normally in 2 years. It transited the planets in Virgo for 18 months. Mars has an unusual angle to its orbit, and sometimes unusual things happen. And the whole Vietnam War was triggered in that way. Now, Lyndon Johnson was really a Virgo. Virgos like to talk about their health or their lack of health. And he was so much of a Virgo. I think he had some kind of operation while he was in office, and he bared his torso in order to show the press his operation scar. Typical Virgo. So this is looking at let's look at the second one. This is the second inauguration, and there is only one transit, and that is the transit of the Saturn is opposite to Mars. And this led to he could have run for office again. He won, he had the short run in office by ascending after having been vice president. And then he was elected to another term. He could have gone for yet another term, but he received so much criticism from the Vietnam War and the second inauguration, Saturn opposite Sun, shows that he had a negative image of himself. And Virgo is a sign of somebody who will change and will change to please other people. And he received so much criticism and he became so doubtful of himself that he did not want to run for president again. And he recommended that Hubert Humphrey be the candidate. And, and so that is foreshown. That's the only aspect in the second inauguration from the outer planets, and it's clear that it really was there. It doesn't show anything about his destiny that we know of. It could, but I don't think that it does. Now we come to something that we're going to. Oh, what is this? Now, for the rest of the evening, we're going to play and we're going to have fun. This is the horoscope of Jack Kennedy. And we have to talk about a whole bunch of things that are interesting. This can't be all dry astrology and poor discussion of politics. We have to have things that we're interested in. If we look at this natal chart, half of the planets are in the 8th house. And the 8th house is the sign of death, the house of death. And so you might say he was destined to die. But the 8th house is also a house of mystery. And there are many books written and movies made about who killed Jack Kennedy. And we're going to discuss that for the next few minutes, not because I'm a conspiracy theorist, but we will do our own wild speculation. Now, what is going to be said in the next 10 minutes, don't take it too seriously. I'm not just joking around with this class. There are some serious things that are going to be said, but the speculative part of what is being said is not to be taken highly seriously. Now, this speculation is not valid information. Now, speculation is not, it's important, because if you get stuck in seeing things always the same way or seeing things the way the world sees things, there are no improvements. Speculation is a matter of Jupiter and Uranus. And Uranus, in order to bring in intuitions, even if the intuitions are misunderstood or the interpretation of them is a little off-center, it's important for bringing new things in. So it's helpful. It's in science, they're called tentative hypotheses, but a tentative hypothesis is much more conservative than what we're going to do. We're going to ask some questions. The first question is, why was he assassinated? Now, the answer for some, why he was assassinated, is called the curse of Tippecanoe. And for some, the curse of Tippecanoe is the curse of Tenskwatya, who was the brother of Tecumseh. Some people call this the curse of Tecumseh. And some people call it the curse of Zero. The idea is that every president after the curse that was born in a year that is elected in a year that ends with a 0 was due to die in office. But when Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980 and he didn't die in office, if you go to Wikipedia and look at the curse of 0, the curse of 0 will tell you that it was disproved by the non-dying of Ronald Reagan. It's called an urban legend. It's called false. And in this case, Wikipedia is wrong. And in this case, Wikipedia didn't take astrology into account, and if it had taken astrology into account, it might have looked at things differently. Very few people take astrology into account. So we're going to have to get at this. Now, the curse of Tecumseh, or the curse of Tippecanoe, Tecumseh was an Indian that this took place in Indiana. It was part of the Europeans moving west and the Indians not taking it and fighting back. And William Henry Harrison defeated Tecumseh. And in the defeat, his brother, Tenskwatawa, I finally got it, Tenskwatawa, pronounced the curse and said that every one of your leaders in every 20 years will die in office. All right, this involves what are called trigons of Saturn and Jupiter. Every 20 years, Saturn and Jupiter form a conjunction, approximately 20 years. And when there is a conjunction, it is about 243 degrees forward on the zodiac. That means that if one conjunction is at 0 of Aries, the next one will be at 3 of Sagittarius, and the next one will be at 6 of Leo. And you can see that if you draw lines from one conjunction to the next, to the next, to the next, you see a bunch of triangles formed by them. They're not exact triangles because of the progression forward, so they're called trigons instead of triangles. Now, they progress through an element. In the example I just gave you, they go through fire for a number of conjunctions, and then they go through earth for a number of conjunctions. Now there is, to understand the astrology of this, there is something like a principle or a law of foundation, or a principle or law of precedence. Astrologers claim that at the start of something, what you do in the very beginning determines how things are going to progress. Like that old statement, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. All of astrology is based on this, natal astrology, because it's based on the first thing that you do in life, the first breath that you take. And that sets the tone for the entirety of your life. All right, so William Henry Harrison defeated Tecumseh, and the curse was pronounced. After that, William Henry Harrison, because of his military success, was elected president in 1840. He was in office 1 month when he died. 20 years later, Lincoln died in office, was assassinated. Then Garfield, McKinley, Harding, Roosevelt, and Kennedy. All, every 20 years, died in office. Now Reagan was shot, but he wasn't killed, and that fits into this also. And after that, the curse was broken. Bush was elected and Biden was elected on under a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, and neither of them has died in office. So we don't know about Biden. He might just reawaken the curse. I don't want to talk funny about that, but that. Now, the period in question that we're talking about took place when the conjunctions were in Earth signs. And the first conjunction in Earth signs in that cycle was in Virgo. However, the next conjunction was not in Earth signs, in an Earth sign because of the angles of the orbits. The next one was back in a fire sign. So it is the way this works, the only time, the precedent event that is when things will be in trigons is when the trigons will stay in that element. So the first one in Virgo didn't count because the next one after that was in fire, and it didn't, and that didn't allow a succession of Earth signs. But the next one was in Capricorn. And all of them after that, until Reagan, all of them were in Earth signs. And the conjunction in Capricorn was in the 8th house of the United States chart, which is the house of death. So there maybe was a there was a curse by Tenskwatawa, by Tenskwatawa. There it is. There maybe was a curse, but it was just a recognition of something, or it played on something that was in the air. Very often curses draw on energy that is in the air, and maybe he was sensitive enough to know that. I doubt that he was a serious astrologer, but you can sense the feeling of something in the air. All right, the first conjunction in air signs was when Ronald Reagan was elected president, and he was shot. But because it was not in Earth signs any longer, he survived. And but the first one in air signs did not did not stick either, because the next one was back in Earth again, and then finally Joe Biden in 2020 was in air. Incidentally, the 2020 conjunction was in the 9th house of the United States, and it was in Aquarius. So we can expect in the next several hundred years a big upswing in Aquarian values and religion and things like that. All right. Now let's go for some more speculation. And this is speculation that you won't find anywhere else. I'm not to be outdone by the world. Why Kennedy? Why would someone at the height of his popularity, and would almost certainly have been a shoo-in for another term, be assassinated? And then his brother was assassinated. Now, what I'm going to put forth is not a speculation, but it is a way of thinking about things, because I don't really believe this. If you look at history and you try to look at two people who would have the character of Jack and Bobby Kennedy, look back through historical figures and see if there's anyone like that. And when I did that, I came up with Brutus and Cassius. We know something about their character, and it's not exactly the way it was in Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, but Shakespeare didn't get it completely wrong either. So the personalities of Jack and Bobby are like those of Brutus and Cassius. If you were to believe this speculation, which I don't, who would Ted be? you'd have to see who in the conspiracy had a character like Ted. And if that came to be accurate, I've never taken the time to do it, then you might want to think about it more. Now, if this is true, was Lyndon Johnson Julius Caesar? Was he the one that was assassinated and then 2 lifetimes later, which is about right in time, gets the chance to get to do what he wanted to do before? I don't know. Don't consider it seriously, but it's something to think about. The next speculation to look into, who killed Kennedy? That is the immediate killer and the ultimate killer. Now this is something that there are many, many speculations about it. The official answer is that it was Lee Harvey Oswald. And there is a man who is still alive in prison that claims he shot Kennedy. His name is James Files. And there's all sorts of books and movies and things about the whole business. In the interview, he said he could provide evidence. And I don't know if it was him, but somebody provided evidence and said that on the one of the horizontal bars of the fence on the grassy knoll, that if you looked there, you would find shell casings standing on end on that horizontal. And people have gone there, and they have indeed found them. This is years later. And so there's also, see, we're dealing with the 8th house, we're dealing with a lot of mystery. And who actually did the firing, whether it's James Files or whether it was Lee Harvey Oswald or was it someone else, we don't know. And until we can see in the memory of nature for something other than curiosity, we won't know. The information is there, but it's not to be looked at idly. Now, who was ultimately behind all of this? Now, some people think it was Cubans. In fact, some people think that the shooter was a Cuban. And the reason why? Because Kennedy wasn't successful in driving out Castro in that failed Bay of Pigs invasion. I don't know, but there were Cuban assassins that were associated with the Chicago mob. There certainly seemed to be a lot of mafia connections with Chicago with regard to this. No matter what you're looking into. Some think that the mafia was trying to get rid of Kennedy because Bobby was coming down hard on the mafia, was trying to break up the mafia. Others believe that the mafia, especially the Chicago mafia, wanted to get rid of Kennedy because he didn't get Castro out, and they had all of their very lucrative gambling in Cuba. So there's a reason for that. Others believe that the CIA is behind it, even if the mafia was used. There were a lot of connections between the mafia and the Kennedy family. In fact, Kennedy even had a brief relationship, I think maybe both of them did, a brief relationship with a woman called daughter to the mafia. It's all dark and ugly, and it's wild, a lot of wild speculation. Some people even think it was because he was trying to change or dismantle the Federal Reserve, and that at the behest of people in high places, powerful people wanted him out of there because he was about to disturb their nest. To her very day, Jackie, her last day of her life, Jackie felt that Lyndon Johnson was behind it, and that which would bring that whole Julius Caesar idea back into function. Some people even think that Nixon was involved because Nixon, acting as a private attorney, had made a visit the day before the assassination. Nixon was in Dallas. So these are all spooky, speculative things. That's what you have to deal with when you're dealing with secrets and things of that nature. So let's have a little bit to say about the Kennedy chart, and we'll call it an evening because we're already over an hour. So we find here Mars, Mercury, and Jupiter in conjunction, and that's him. He had a forceful mind, a quick mind. He could read all of them. He was a speed reader with high retention. And Taurus is one of the most Taurus and Cancer are two of the most retentive signs of all. And he would read all of the main newspapers in the morning before he even started his work for the day. We find Libra rising, and that was his charm. We saw that going all the way back to Bill Clinton, that he had that same kind of thing. Venus square the moon shows that he had not such good understanding and feeling about women, and they're in the mercurial signs, which are known for ambivalence, or so he was a womanizer. He had a lot of different women. Maybe it was even something that he couldn't, was always trying to understand a woman but couldn't, but was doing it in the wrong way through having sexual relations. The sun is sextile to Neptune. He had a very good understanding of things. He could sense things. And the sun square Pluto is again almost exact, 8 minutes away. It's hard to find a conjunction that's stronger than that in a horoscope. And that's again powerful people. Was he in, that's Pluto is the underground, the underworld, and it's also the CIA. So you can see how the mystery or the secret of the 8th house gets, his horoscopes gets exaggerated in the speculations that people have. It's likely that there was some kind of not to his good connection with the underworld. It's possible that the secret police, the CIA, the power behind the throne, may very well have been behind it. So it's so that kind of thing is there. All right. So the Pluto, we're talking about the Pluto here in the transiting chart, in the inauguration chart. Jupiter, Uranus is square Jupiter. Oh, all right. Jupiter square Uranus here. And that's, we said earlier, I said that Jupiter and Uranus are the planets of speculation. And so there are a lot of speculations about his presidency and what came out of it. So was this a culmination of his life? I don't think so, but there are things that indicate the outcome of his presidency that are in the transits that are pretty clear and pretty undeniable. Now, it's interesting. There are a lot of things I'd like to look into, but I don't always have time to do that. This is as far as we're going to go this evening. The next time, we're going to look at the remaining 3 presidents: Eisenhower, Truman, and Franklin Roosevelt, and we're going to look at some other charts. We're going to have to get back to the Robin Williams chart. We know that when Rick was our guest speaker, he talked about the he had very precise mathematical things that showed the death of Robin Williams, and we're going to see if there were any transits ripe at that same time. Thank you very much. I hope you do not take too seriously all of the speculation, but I hope also that you don't throw away the idea of speculating to come to an understanding or to open up the intuition, even if the intuition has to be tuned because it's bent by your opinions or something like that. I hope you had entertainment and had fun and learned at least a little bit of astrology. And, well, we'll see you sometime in early June. Thank you very much.